Hey everyone, welcome to Wildlife Inspired. I'm your host, Scott Keys, and this is your channel for photography, for wildlife, and for wildlife photography. And I've got a really great video with a lot of surprises in it. This is a comparison of macro systems. We're going to be looking at the Olympus or OM systems macro photography versus Nikon's full frame macro photography. And this was surprising. I've got some really interesting results, so stay tuned. I'll tell you all about it, and I've got a lot of examples in this one for you. And we'll get to it right after this. Now, I am just absolutely excited for this video. I've been working with this for a long time. Over the last several months, I've been working with, and I may use the terms Olympus and OM systems interchangeably. Just know that for this video, I'm including these as the same product. Basically, I'm talking about these micro four thirds sensors and the products related to them. In this case, I wanted to deal with macro lenses. So I've got a couple of older videos that talked about longer lenses and comparisons. And if you know me, I'm the practical wildlife photographer. I really believe in what matters. What does the image look like? What does it feel like? And can I even tell some of these differences? And so I wanted to see what macro photography was like on each system. So I used my Nikon full frame system. I'll talk about the lenses that I used in a little bit. And then I used this OM systems with a couple of their lenses, and I did some direct comparisons. Now I will tell you, going into this video, I had some beliefs, some hypotheses. And one of those was around this idea of depth of field. But I wanted to introduce this topic of diffraction. So we're going to talk about those two concepts a lot today. It really is the premise of this video. We'll show you some image quality. For a long time, Olympus shooters have touted the ability to get better depth of field, meaning they can get more of their subject in focus. For anybody that's played around with macro photography, you will know that it can become extremely frustrating to try to get these small subjects with very shallow depth of field and get them in focus or to show the subject as you would like to see it. Sometimes part of it is in focus and part of it's not. Even with some of the eyes of a subject, some of the eyes in focus and some of it's not. And we generally like to deal with a little larger depth of field when doing macro photography. That said, the Olympus system offers some true benefits. I'm going to show you some websites and some numbers just to reiterate this. But when I was doing this video, I had this idea that I was going to show Olympus shooters that it's not always just about depth of field. When we talk about these systems and compare them, there's another factor that is very relevant to macro photography called diffraction. Now, I've done a video on that. I'm going to explain diffraction in just a minute, and I'm going to do it very high level. But for the purpose of this video, what I wanted to see is, are Olympus shooters cheating a little bit? Are they only talking about depth of field, but not discussing diffraction? And so for this video, I thought what I was going to do was show you that, yes, you're getting better depth of field, but it's not apples to apples, because this idea of diffraction means that your Olympus sensors are not performing as well as most good full frame sensors. That was the premise. Reality was different. And I'm going to show you some things that I still can't explain when doing this video. So for my Olympus friends out there, I don't want you to give up on me yet. May have tried to prove you wrong in some instances, but you're going to get some redemption in this video. So before we get into it, let's just talk quickly about diffraction and depth of field. I'm going to pull up a website over here. And this is a website I've used in the past. So when I look at depth of field, there's some calculators out there. This is a website I like. It's called Photo Pills. This is going to show just depth of field. Now, this shouldn't come as any surprise. If you know macro photography or you know Olympus systems, you know that they have a greater depth of field. I just want to show you what that looks like. I put some numbers in here. I put in some Nikon full frame cameras. That's really all that's relevant for that top box. I put in the focal length of a lens that I used for this video. One of the lenses I used was a 180 millimeter lens. Put the aperture at f11 with a minimum focus or focusing distance of 12 inches. The only number I really want you to do down here where my cursor is, I know it's a little hard to read, is 0.03 inches. That's the depth of field calculated. Again, don't get too bogged down into this. A little bit of this is going to be conceptual. Let me show you an Olympus system. And this is actually a system that I used for this video, a 90 millimeter lens. Now remember, with these micro four thirds sensors, we are going to get 180 millimeter field of view. It's not magnification, it's field of view. This means that the 90 millimeter lens is going to project an image on the back sensor of a smaller sensor that Olympus uses or OM Systems uses. And that is going to equate to approximately 180 millimeters had it been shot on a full frame sensor. Have videos on that. Check my channel. There's a lot of information out there. I can't get into everything in this video because I really want to get into the images. What I do want you to pay attention to is this down here, the depth of field at 0.11. This is going to tell you that you get at least 3 times greater depth of field. So I see more of the subject. And notice these are very small numbers. So with macro photography, again, the advantage is for OM systems is I get this greater depth of field provided I use the same aperture and I have the same working distance or the same focusing distance, focal distance away. Makes sense so far, right? All right, so OM systems are like, this is the advantage for macro photography. With the equivalent apertures, I'm gathering the same amount of light. So both of these comparisons, this 180 millimeter f11 and this 90 millimeter f11 are both gathering the same amount of light. However, the OM camera system is going to give me a greater depth of field. So that's good. And that's what most people talk about. What they don't talk about is diffraction. So the idea around diffraction, and I'm going to make this one pretty simple. I'm going to get back to these charts in just a second. I have a video on diffraction. Please, if you don't know anything about it, I need you to stop this video and go watch that video because it's much longer. I'm going to explain this as quickly as I can. One of the examples I like to use when talking about diffraction with people that aren't quite getting the concept is there's 2 factors for image quality as it relates to diffraction. There's an opening, so I'll put my finger up here, that represents the opening, the pupil diameter, the opening of the lens. So we may call that aperture, but really it's just this opening of the lens. If I have a wide open aperture, something like f2.8, I'm probably a nice big opening. If I've got a small aperture like f22, it's really, really, really small. The other part of diffraction that is involved is the back. So think of the sensor as the target. Each of those pixels in your sensor can be different sizes. We can have large pixels back there or small pixels. We call them pixels. They're actually called photoreceptors. So to be technically perfect, each of those little receptors on the back, and your camera has millions of them. That's the megapixels of the camera. The more you have, the more megapixels you have. One of the things about OM cameras is they have a very small sensor, but relatively speaking, they have a lot of megapixels. What that means is each of those little photoreceptors is smaller. That's the target. So I want you to think of the target in this example as a bullseye. Here's the example. Diffraction is the size of this opening. Take a bullet, shoot it through the first opening, that's the aperture, and if it makes it through cleanly, it's going to hit the bullseye on the back in a very finite area. It's just going to hit the bullseye and it's not going to break up. Picture a bullet now, the same size, fitting perfectly through the center, but it's a much smaller opening. Now the bullet passes through, but it breaks up. And the smaller that opening is, the more the bullet passes through, the more it breaks up. So it kind of shoots out in a pattern. That's diffraction. Only with diffraction, it's working with waves of light, and the waves of light are getting bent and they're kind of like spreading out. Now think about the target on the back. If I've got a great big bullseye representing a really big photoreceptor, even if the bullet passes through and breaks up a little bit, it's still going to land in the bullseye. But the smaller that aperture is, the more it breaks up, the wider the dispersal, and eventually it falls outside of that bullseye, and then you get this loss of quality in your images. Then you get this diffraction that becomes evident. It actually hurts the image quality. If the bullseye is big, the diffraction is less obvious. But remember I said those Olympus cameras have a lot of pixels packed in. So I'm going to show you a chart that actually shows you the size of the pixel on an Olympus camera versus the camera that I used for this video, which was the Z6 III. This is diffraction. I put in a couple of basic numbers here. The first one is the aperture. Remember, there's 2 factors, the size of the opening and the size of the target in the back. The aperture on this is f11. The pixel size is the bullseye. That's the size of the target. That's each individual. Those are 6 microns. So it's very, very small. The key number here is that this chart is going to tell me that diffraction may become visible with this specific setup at f11. So if I go to f16, it gets worse. If I go to f22, it gets even worse. Remember that opening gets smaller and smaller. The bullet, the light wave, goes through there. It gets spread out more as we go. Notice what happens when I switch to the Olympus system. And this is the part a lot of people forget, and this is where I thought I was going to prove my Olympus friends wrong in the fact that their macro setups were superior because they get better depth of field. In this case, the pixel size is half. It's less than 3 microns. And this tells me diffraction may become visible at f5.6. Now that's a big deal. What this just told me is that at f11, Nikon is still probably going to be sharp, but after that it may start to deteriorate. But on the Olympus system, this tells me that diffraction might become evident at f5.6, which means I can't shoot at f8. I can't shoot at f11. I can't shoot at f16. So the depth of field that I gain from the system, I lose because diffraction tells me I can't shoot there anyway. Watch what happens when I go back to the original chart of depth of field and keep those two numbers in mind. Diffraction occurs at f11 on the Nikon system, which gives me a depth of field of 0.03 inches. On the Olympus system, I have to now take my aperture down to 5.6. That's where it told me diffraction started, and I lose a tremendous amount, 0.05 inches now versus 0.11 inches, which is much closer to that Nikon system. Again, this is where I thought I got them. My Olympus shooters are only telling half the truth, and if we put the full equation in here, the Olympus system mitigates a lot of what happened. Well, here's what really happened. First of all, I want to talk about the setup. I used 2 lenses. The first lens I got from Olympus was a 60mm lens. I'll put a picture of it over here compared to my 100mm Nikon, and these are the 2 lenses I started to compare. I did not like this comparison. I didn't deal with it very long. The reason I didn't like it is that lens was actually so small. It didn't feel right for me. And it's probably because I'm used to using longer lenses. So I used it. It was very sharp. I had no problems with the lens, but I wanted a better comparison. So I got the 90mm instead. So again, B&H, thanks for sending me all these lenses. I then compared the 90mm to a Leica 180. I'll get to that in a minute. Let me just go back here and show you what I first did. And I want to talk about this depth of field. So this is an Olympus 60mm lens at f11. I'll put the numbers down below me so you can see. I want you to look at this part of the image right in here. This is in focus at f11. And then when I go to f22, you could see that this bottom starts to become in focus. So there is a difference. Again, I'll go back slowly. f11, you can see the background's a little more out of focus. And when I go to f22, this becomes a little more in focus back here. And then this whole flower down here is in focus. Now I'm going to jump over to the Nikon. This is the Nikon 100mm macro lens. Because I was using a 60mm lens on the Olympus system, I had a field of view of 120mm. You're going to see a difference. This Olympus system actually magnified a little bit more. So you can notice it's a little bit smaller. But let's look at that depth of field. Depth of field on this flower, this is the flower we were just looking at f11, is not evident. Like I can't really see anything in focus there. And when I go down to f22, I just start to get it in focus. It's almost like the f22 Nikon image was comparable or more comparable to the f11 Olympus image. Let me show them next to each other. So this is the f11 Nikon. And then I'm going to pop over and show you the f11 Olympus. I'll go back and forth one more time. There's the Nikon. You can see it's all out of focus in here. And on the Olympus system, it's mostly in focus, especially along the top of that. So I did get that greater depth of field. That's exactly what I expected. Then some weird things happened. So the next thing I wanted to do is I showed the depth of field. I wanted to go over and show this idea around diffraction. And this is where I was going to prove that none of this really matters because diffraction on the Olympus system doesn't work. So I took a picture of a barcode. So a lot of details in this barcode. Let me just show you what this looks like. So over on this side, I've got a detail of a barcode. I'll put the f-stop values up here. But top left is, and I'll actually just pop them up here real quick for my benefit, is 5.6. And then I've got f8, f11 is bottom left, or bottom right, and I'm sorry, bottom left is f11, f22 is bottom right. I'll put the numbers up there so I don't confuse you. The sharpest part of this image is right here. So at f5.6, this is my narrowest depth of field, and then I go up to f22. I tried to use this barcode to eliminate some of the depth of field, so it's more of a flat image, but I made sure everything was in focus. Let me get a little closer and show you what happened here. And this is again with that 60mm lens. I want you to look right here on each of these photos. What we would expect with diffraction is that somewhere around f8, it becomes evident. The quality starts to suffer. And by the time we get to f22 on this Olympus sensor, it's garbage. Like I can't even look at it. And a weird thing happened. I'm looking at this thinking I did something wrong because the f5.6 image doesn't look much different than the f8 image in terms of diffraction or loss of quality. I go down to the f11, I'm like, that doesn't look much different either. And then I go to the f22 and I'm like, maybe it's a little different. It's not significant. Let me zoom in here a little bit more. Maybe I did something wrong. Maybe my eyes are going bad. Well, there's a slight loss in quality at f22, but nowhere near what I should expect. I mean, remember that chart I showed you in the beginning said we should start to experience diffraction and deterioration at f5.6. By f8, start to see it. By f11 should be really obvious. By the time we get down to 22, should be unusable. Interestingly enough, if I look at this little white dot in here, it doesn't look that much different. And if I look at this little teeny black dot off to the side right here, it doesn't look that much different. So this was odd. So I thought, okay, let me get another lens and let me play around more with this concept of diffraction, because this is really what the crux of this video is going to be about. It's this idea of, does the Olympus system really suffer from this diffraction that I expected it to suffer from? And does it mitigate the idea that it gets a better depth of field? Bear with me, this gets real interesting. The next comparison I did was to look at two lenses, and I'll show them to you because I actually have both of these still here. This is to give you an idea of size difference, this is the 90mm Olympus lens, or OM lens, made by Zuiko. And this is my 180mm lens made by Leiwa. So yes, there's a difference in size. This one actually has a lens hood on it, makes it look a little bigger. Not a huge difference. My setup was a little heavier, a little bit longer, and 180mm. The neat thing about this comparison is the 90mm Olympus lens gives me a 180mm field of view. This should be a really great comparison. It actually was very, very, very interesting. I want to start here with a couple of examples. This is the meat of the video right here. Don't tune away from this. It's going to be very, very interesting. I'm going to start with my Nikon setup, and I'm going to go 5.6, f11, f16, and f22, and I'm going to put them all side by side for you. And I want you to notice what happens with this diffraction. I'll put these a little bit closer, and we're going to focus on one part of the eye. Now, this is really, really hyper zoomed, but it's going to illustrate the point pretty quickly. All right, there we go. So in this example, top left is 5.6, and I want you to notice, and I know it's a little bit hard to come across YouTube. You got to take my word for it here. I can see individual eye segments. So these little tiny, very, very tiny areas of the eye are in focus, and I can actually see detail in there. This is an ambush bug, by the way. This is my favorite subject to play around with when testing equipment because they don't move. They're perfectly still, unbelievably still. And I can always get into the eye, and if I get focus on that eye perfectly, I can see the detail in it. As I start to lose the detail in the eye, I can start to estimate when diffraction comes in. So the top left is where I would expect diffraction with this setup, and this is f11. There is a slight loss of detail in the eye, but I can still make out the bumps around the outside edge. When I get to f16, lower left, those bumps actually start to deteriorate. I can't even get the detail in the bumps. The eye has no detail, or that super fine detail is gone. And at f22, look how soft this area around the eye looks compared to 5.6. I have a greater depth of field at f22, but diffraction has essentially made this unusable. Now, if I zoom out a ton, yeah, you can do something like this. Then diffraction, you don't really see it as much. You're not really tight. But if I'm doing detailed work, if I'm getting in tight, you're going to see some of this, depending on how much you crop down and everything else. All right, so that was the Nikon system. It was very evident at f/22. You saw that. Now I'm going to pop over here. I'm going to pull up the same apertures. I got a little different. I like the background on this image a little bit better. And it magnified a little bit more. So the magnification from this lens, by the way, this 90 millimeter lens, this is a 2x magnification. And my 180 millimeter lens is a 1.5. So this 90 millimeter, it does allow me to get a little closer. I tried to keep it pretty much the same. Because I got a little closer, it will influence depth of field a little bit, but we're looking at diffraction for this. So let me zoom in here to that same eye we just looked at. All right, let's go right here. I'm going to pull all these eyes up here near each other so you can see them. And at f5.6, start to have a little bit of detail. On this one at f11, I have pretty good detail in the eye. Here's where it got weird. I started to see f16 on my Nikon system, pretty obvious, and at f22 it was unusable. f16 on this system doesn't look bad, and f22 is still usable. Now, I don't know how. This is the video right here. I can't explain this. It makes no sense to me. I did not have any settings turned on in the camera bodies that should influence this, but there is something happening to mitigate diffraction. And my guess is it's in that camera body. I did not have settings turned on. Nikon does have some diffraction reduction, I think they call it, but it's a mitigation feature for diffraction. I did not have that turned on because I didn't think it was fair. But man, the whole crux of my video was supposed to be this, and it didn't work. This Olympus system gave me a better depth of field, and it actually, I dare say, it had better diffraction results. The image quality was better. It doesn't make any sense. Let me show you this. I'll put them all next to each other. I'm going to put the f5.6s next to each other, and I'm going to put the f22s next to each other. This is going to open up and show you. Let me just level these up. So the top two are the Nikon at 5, 6, and 22, and the bottom two are the Olympus. Now, what I will tell you is, and I know it's going to be tough for you to see, I need you to take my word for this, the f5.6 image on the Nikon system was a hair sharper. And I mean a hair, not much, but it was. However, the f22 image on the Olympus was night and day compared to that Nikon. I mean, look at the difference here. And there's no detail around this eye at f22 on the Nikon. Here there is. It doesn't make sense. This isn't supposed to happen. This should have been the inverse. I should have seen worse results with the Olympus based off of that smaller pixel size and that light source experiencing this diffraction. Remember the bullet going through the hole, it blows up wide. The smaller the target, the smaller the pixel, the more of the bullet gets outside of that area. In this case, the more of the light wave is outside of that area. They call these airy discs. Again, got a video on it. You can watch it. It'll explain it better than I did in this video. But it should have been worse, and it's not. And now I'm just baffled. Now I'm just thinking, like, this doesn't make sense. Somebody down in the comments, you know why this happens. I do not. I cannot explain it other than there's a technology in the camera body that is at work here. And I'm not familiar enough with those Olympus bodies to tell you the difference. By the way, I did some other tests because I just couldn't believe what was going on. So I took a CD with some scratches in it. I thought, man, I must have made a mistake over here. The top two are Nikon. I want you to look at this area right here on the top and this area right here, and then see all these specks, all these little dust spots that were evident at f5.6. Can't even see them at f22. That's that diffraction. When I went down to the bottom, the sharpest part of this image, these little scratches right here at f5.6. And then at f22, you can still see the scratches. You can still see the dust marks down here. I cannot explain this, but every test I did, The same result. It was all the same. Diffraction didn't come into play like I thought it would be. So what did this prove to me? Well, it proved a couple things. If I'm taking away some thoughts from this one, the Olympus system did give me this much better depth of field. And at the same time, the diffraction that I thought was going to occur and erode image quality didn't occur. It is a micro four thirds sensor, so it's a much smaller sensor. There's not a ton of megapixels. These images are gonna, in my mind, be like pre-cropped, so you're not gonna be able to crop down a lot. I did not use my Nikon Z9 camera in this setup. That would have offered me some megapixel advantages. So in other words, I could crop images down to get them closer to the Olympus setup. In the past, I do still believe this, so no offense to people, but I believe that taking a higher megapixel Nikon camera or Canon or Sony for wildlife photography, outdoor wildlife photography, is a better option than an Olympus system. I've tested those, I've got videos on it. That is my belief. Not night and day difference, by the way, but that is my belief. For macro photography, I have started to lean the other way. If I had the money to buy both setups, I might. If I was highly invested in macro photography and wildlife was secondary to me, or tertiary, like if it just wasn't the biggest consideration I had, but macro was like the main thing I do, boy, these Olympus systems would be very, 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 very tempting based off of a couple things. I'm going to show you a couple images that I edited up as we run through this video. The first one was just that this little tiny spider. I think this was at f11. Gave me a nice depth of field. I could see most of it. The little hairs on the back were very, very sharp. I didn't test these out in the field a lot. I did most of my testing inside as I was comparing things. And then I paired through to show you what I liked. I'll put these images over here. This is a cucumber beetle. I like this because I got it just as the wings were opening up. You will see some motion in these antennae. That's a video for another day. Some of you are going to pick that out and say like, I know why that happened. I'll explain why that happened. But if you look at that one antenna, there's some motion blur there. These were obviously, if you know anything about macro photography, you'll know that that is a result of the flash. This image I like just because it showed a lot of detail. There was a lot of pollen affixed to the eyes and the little hairs around this honeybee. My favorite image, and one that I'm really happy that I was able to do this with, is with a wider depth of field, which is what a lot of this video has been about. There's this idea that, well, I can't get these really soft images with a lot of bokeh. So I stopped an image down to f4. And this was my favorite image that I took. It's very simple. This is not my typical style. That circle, by the way, that spiral is a very appealing spiral. I've done some videos in the past around composition. I talked about things like the golden spiral and golden ratio. It's really kind of a cool concept. But in nature, these ideas of soft curves and sometimes spirals are very, very appealing. And in this case, shot with that wide open aperture, that part was pretty in focus, so it's easy to make out the details, and the rest was really, really, really soft and pretty. I by the way, love this image. It is not typical of my style, but I really, really, really like this. I actually think it would make a very nice piece printed and put on a wall in the right setting. So those are a couple of images that I took with that 90mm lens on the Olympus system, just to give you an idea of what it looked like. I was very happy with the results. Did not have a lot of issues with this at all. When I look at pros and cons for these, I like to do pros and cons videos, but when I look at like pros and cons of this setup, 180mm focal length equivalent, focal view, field of view equivalent. 90mm lens makes it pretty small. We know these Olympus bodies, this is the OM2. We know they're very small to begin with, so it's a very light setup. When you put the 60mm on here, it was incredibly light. It was almost too light. And actually with the 60mm, I like to use diffusers. I found it hard to use a diffuser with the 60mm. With these lenses, the diffuser kind of sits on top. So all the images you saw today were with the use of diffusers, but they kind of rest on top of this body. I would have had to modify to use that 60mm lens. I would have had to modify my flash setup. But yeah, the size was great, weight was great, image quality was great, depth of field was great. These are all pros. Where I thought the cons were going to come in was going to be around this idea of diffraction and not being able to maximize apertures like f11 or f16 if I needed to keep that wide depth of field. That did not prove to be the case, so I'm going to put it as a con and then I'm going to cross it out because I couldn't replicate what I thought would happen. The only other con might be that what you take in camera is not going to be very croppable. So I've found that with Olympus systems in general. When you're only dealing with, I say only, years ago 20 megapixels would have been a ton of megapixels, but I'll say it, when you're only dealing with 20 megapixels, it doesn't give you the ability to crop too much. So I would say the only downside might be if you wanted to crop a little bit more than what you were given, you may not have that option. I also don't think these systems work as well when you want these more like blurred backgrounds, but I was not totally dissatisfied with that. You're not going to get this super shallow depth of field that you can achieve with other lenses and full frame bodies, but I showed you that one example. I'll put it back up here again. I showed you can get some really nice out of focus feel, some nice blur. I didn't digitally manipulate that background at all. That's the effect from the camera and lens combination. So pretty good overall. So pros and cons, yeah, very heavy on the pros for macro photography, guys. One of the other cons is you don't get a lot of choice. With some systems, you're going to get a lot more diversity in the portfolio of lenses available to you. So with this camera system, it's going to be a little more limited. I think they're making now, I want to say they make like a 60, a 90. They make one other, Zuko makes one other lens. I'll list it over here, what they make. And there could be some other options out there besides these lenses. These tend to be their higher quality lenses. The price, by the way, on that 90 millimeter, not cheap. It was $1,800. I did not expect it to be that much. To put that into comparison, I compared it with a lens that was 180 millimeters, a very sharp lens, and that lens was $500. So there are some differences in the lenses. One is autofocus, one did not have macro autofocus, but a little steep on price. I could probably list that as a con for you as well. So anyway, I hope you like this video. One of my more detailed comparison videos, but that's the way I operate. I love to just see it side by side. By the way, I do this with everything. If I buy olive oil at the store, I test them next to each other in a blind taste test. If I buy a new bourbon, I blind taste test it with other bourbons. I really do like to be practical and see, like, sometimes marketing and hype and brand loyalty, they all sway you a certain way. But when you put it side by side, it really tells the story. And I thought this story was told pretty clearly. So nice job, Olympus, and nice job, OM systems. And really impressed with the macro photography for this one. I'm going to sign off for today. If you're not subscribed to the channel, go down and hit the subscribe button now. I've got videos that are these more gear-oriented and comparison videos. I've also got a lot of educational videos, how-to type videos on the channel. So check out my playlist down below. If you're not on my Patreon site, check that out. That's where I actually take you in the field a little bit more. I show you what I'm doing in the field, and then I bring images back. And we talk a lot more about editing wildlife, specifically bird photos. So take a look at my Patreon site if you're not on there already. Hit the bell for notifications. That'll let you know when I have a new video out. Hit the thumbs up. That'll push the content out to like-minded people. And as always, it's a long video and I apologize, but I think there's some good stuff in here. As always, I hope we can continue to find inspiration in wildlife together.